Welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast. Here is Munir El-Azouzi from easymedicaldevice.com. And today we'll try to tell you the truth about what's happening in the UK. I mean, Europe versus UK, because there are so many changes that are happening in Europe first and also then in UK, because UK is also in its transition since Brexit happens. So now we'll try to tell you a bit more about how you should engage with the UK MHRA, how you can register your products, and what are the things that you need to know. And for that, I have with me Claire Dyson, which is a medical device expert, and she has a lot of experience in the UK because she worked for some notified bodies. So Claire, welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast.
Hello, Munir. Thank you. And hello, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be here.
Great. So really thank you, Claire, for coming to us, because mainly we have, a lot of customers that I have a lot of questions about UK, about what's the situation, what we are doing, what we should do. Can we do this? Can we do that? So the objective of today is mainly to clear out all those questions, to try to guide people on what they should really do when they are going to the UK. But before that, can you just explain to us who you are mainly and what you have done maybe in your past?
Yeah, so I've got a very long past. That happens when you get to my age. I started off with rational drug design. So I was looking at applications of X-ray crystallography, NMS spectroscopy to design at a molecular level drugs for mainly anti-cancer, but some antivirals, antibiotics. I then went into medical devices through devices that interacted with drugs. So photodynamic therapy, later drug delivery systems, and also glucose monitors, because it's sort of the same thing. You're analyzing glucose, but it's still in that chemistry domain. And then 5 years ago, I did a huge leap across the bridge into the certification bodies. I started off at LRQA. I then went on to DEKRA. My last role was actually head of UK approved bodies. So I was leading the team that established DEKRA's UK approved body. In the UK, we got our designation in September 2022. But I resigned at the beginning of April, which is a great opportunity because it means that I can actually talk quite freely about the certification process, conformity assessment process. And obviously, as I'm sure you're really aware, notified bodies and UK approved bodies, we can't offer consultancy. So we certainly can't interact one-to-one with medical device manufacturers, but we're also quite restricted in what we can say openly. So this is my opportunity to share.
It's your moment, if I can say, to help us without being charged or without being said that you are consulting for while you are not fed by it. So great. Let's use this time and to try to get some knowledge from you and tips, tricks, or things that can help our audience on getting to the UK market. The first question that I have, maybe, and the question that a lot of people are asking, is about what is the current situation with the UK related to timelines, because we know that since Brexit now there is a lot of transition that are happening, a change to a new regulation, etc. But recently there was some communication also by the UK regarding new timelines again and new things, etc. So can we summarize again what's happening? What can we do? What are the timelines? When should we be ready for UKCA, for example, within the UK?
Yeah, I mean, the latest change was actually at the end of April 2023, which is actually last month, depending on when you're actually viewing this recording. So what we're seeing in the UK is shifting timelines. I think if we go back historically to the beginning of the journey, the timelines that were put in place were unrealistic, and it was partly a political agenda rather than a real what we can do in manufacturing. And I think certainly, conversations were along the lines of, well, we can't put UKCA on devices within a year of Brexit. And the ministers were sort of coming back, well, why? Why can't you just put a label on it? And of course, if you've been in manufacturing, as I have, you know that you have to go through a change process. If you've got a medical device that requires casework, you've got to order that casework. You've got to order the artwork on the boxes. It takes a long time. It's very expensive as well. And I think now, with the experience that the EU has had with the MDR and pushing back those transitional timelines, I think the UK is really listening. And certainly whilst I was in the UK approved bodies, one thing I will share is that I found MHRA very responsive and very pragmatic. We had very open discussions about the challenges we were facing as UK approved body, but also the manufacturers were facing in adapting to these things. So we have seen MHRA respond to the extension of the EU transitional timelines. At the moment, we're still going through updating all of the information because obviously there's the legislation which is underpinning what we're doing in the UK. And then in addition, the MHRA puts guidance on their website, and it takes time to update all those parts to get a really cohesive, concise review of what's actually happening.
Yeah.
So
the first date that was mentioned by the UK MHRA was the 30th of June 2023, which is soon, next month.
Yeah.
So mainly, what will happen after this date? So what is now the planning, or is this date still valid, or is there some changes, or what will be happening there?
So that was the date when they were going to introduce the new legislation and also transitional measures. And by that was the original date that they wanted to see the UKCA start to be implemented. I think we're very aware with the number of UK approved bodies that we've got, that's not going to happen.
Okay.
So that date of the 30th of June 2023 sort of still sits in a lot of the information, a lot of the literature that's on the website with MHRA.
Yeah.
The MHRA have issued a letter which states that actually it's going to be an extension. We're going to see so there's different stages of what will actually happen. We've got transitional arrangements which can actually be implemented very quickly, and we're likely to see those transitional arrangements come soon. And we're expecting manufacturers to adopt those transitional arrangements more or less immediately, and that will centre around post-market surveillance and making sure that they are reporting things to MHRA if they're placing product on the market on the UK. And then we've got a set of legislation, and this new legislation, the new legislation has already been outlined in MHRA's consultation, which they did from September to November 2021. They've responded to that. They've shown, the UK government's shown what elements they're going to adopt and how they're going to adopt it. We're expecting that to come in around the 1st of July 2025.
Okay.
The reason being it has to be written, it has to go before the UK Parliament. It also has to go before the World Trade Organization, and there needs to be a 6-month period before its implementation.
So but, we have those, if I can say, planning that is ongoing now. And as you've said, in the middle there was the EU that dropped their extension and say, okay, now we are extending until 2027 or 2028, etc., etc. So I suppose that, as you've said, the UK MHRA listened to that and integrates that, and now also will include that on their requirements. So what does it mean for people that are CE marked and want still to go to the UK? So will there be any change for them?
So you can still place product on the market of the UK or on the market of Great Britain, because of course Northern Ireland is still in the European common market, so the requirements are different. So you can still place product on the market of Great Britain if it's got CE marking. Now, with this extension that the EU has implemented, we're now talking about certificate validity rather than certificate expiry. So what that means is if your CE certificate is actually expired, the date on it is in the past, but you've got a letter from your notified body extending the validity of that certificate, you can still place product on the market in the EU. And the UK is honouring that same arrangement and saying, well, yeah, you can still place that CE marked product on the market of Great Britain because it's recognised in the EU. I think it's
really important what you are saying, because regarding what we talked about, the transition period, about the 30th of June 2023, etc. So it means that if my certificate is valid officially by a notified body until, for example, 2027, as we said on the thing, so I can continue to place my device in the UK if my device was registered in the UK. So I can continue to place it in the UK until that date. Is it what the law is saying?
Exactly. In fact, the MHR has taken it a little bit further, and they're talking. It depends on whether the CE certificate was under the directives, whether it was AMD, IVD. There are different dates, but basically, if your certificate was under the AIMD or MDD, we're now looking at the 30th of June 2028, or when the certificate is no longer valid, whichever is sooner.
Okay.
For IVD, it's the 30th of June 2030.
Okay.
And if you've got the CE marking under the MDR or the IVDR, it's also the 30th of June 2030. So there's a little bit longer in the UK to allow manufacturers that transition. I would just add one caution, and that is that we are expecting MHRA to put in very clear stage gates that would trigger the transition from CE to UKCA, irrespective of these sort of bucket dates. And so we're expecting that to centre around significant change, probably with the MDCG guidance definition of what significant change is.
Exactly.
So if your device has a valid CE certificate, but you implement a significant change on that device, that will be the trigger point to go to UKCA. So we're really urging manufacturers to get familiar with what those requirements are, update the QMS, monitor those requirements, which they need to anyway, because they're placing product on that market, and then plan their transition to either coincide with when the certificate's no longer valid or when they've got that significant change. But don't leave it to the last minute.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important to understand that, and these timelines here starts to be everywhere. So we have really to understand, and we have so we can place those products on the market in the UK, but if I can say, as long as your certificate is valid and the UK MHRA is checking that, so there is still the requirements to have an authorized representative in the UK. So then they have to check that your certificate are still valid and everything is fine. So do you think they will ask for those letters and everything? Because at a certain point, those certificates will expire. So they say, can you prove to us that, yes, your certificate is still extended?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, because there is going to be a difference between manufacturers who are located in the UK and they don't have that UK responsible person, and manufacturers who don't have an office in the UK. And that role of the UK responsible person in doing the due diligence to check the technical documentation and make sure that those certificates are actually valid. Now, I'm not a UK responsible person, so that's not my level of expertise, but certainly what I'm seeing is the role of the UK responsible person is evolving, and I would expect that responsibility to sit there.
Yeah, I mean, Easy Medical Device is a UK responsible person, and yes, we are doing those checks, and sometimes it's difficult to explain to a manufacturer that we have to do those checks, that we have to prove that everything is fine, etc., that we have to keep a copy of their technical file. So it's always a challenge, and each time there is a change of your technical file, send that to us again for review and approval. I mean, there is a lot of mechanics behind all that, and sometimes the manufacturers are not really understanding, because they think, oh, we are just paying you to be on our products, the name on the products, and no, we just don't do that only. We have to do a lot of things in the background. So it's I think really important to notice that.
I think it feels like duplication for manufacturers, because they are preparing their technical documentation, they've got their in-house checks, they're sending it to a UK responsible person who's checking some elements. And I know different UK responsible persons, of course, their organizations have different focus areas of that technical documentation, different protocols, and then you're sending it to a certification body. And it just feels like layers of duplication. But I would say that it's the certification body that's tying everything together and looking at both the technical documentation, the on-site audit for the production mechanisms. The UK responsible person is doing their due diligence, how they've defined it, and it is a different role.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. In terms of EU, we have some requirements in EU, and I wanted just to check with you if this is the same for UK. For example, we have a requirement in EU for EU MDR to have a PRRC, a person responsible for regulatory compliance. What about the UK? So is there some kind of same function that is existing now in the UK, or should we have a PRRC to go to the UK?
So there's two different questions. Should we? And is it mandatory?
Okay.
It's not mandatory at the moment. It is something that's in the consultation that MHRA have done. And they've called it both a qualified person as in line with the pharma industry,
Yeah.
as well as the PRRC. And it seems that they are going to go down that line, which I actually think is really, really important, because I think that there are a lot of manufacturers out there, they don't have the in-house competency. And from a sort of business point of view, they can be investing a lot of time, clinical trials, bench testing in developing a device, but they're sort of off the requirements that they would actually need for regulatory compliance. So I think it's really, really important that manufacturers build that relationship with someone who can guide them through their regulatory strategy, their route to market. Even more so now, when you've got to position the EU with the UK, with Switzerland, with the US, and the other jurisdictions. I think otherwise the costs are going to go to very high. And I think in my experience, I've met a lot of manufacturers who've got fabulous technology. It's really, really brilliant, but they've missed the market because they have not got a good regulatory strategy. So I can't emphasize that enough.
No, I think it's a good point. And as we said, so the idea is mainly here to have somebody that is checking that you are compliant, so that mainly there is no kind of issue on the market in the future, which is, I hope, something that people will understand. But yeah, it's coming to the UK, so we'll have maybe the same kind of definition as what we have in Europe. So then there is no need for you to hire a third person or fourth person that can do the same role for that thing.
Exactly. And I think MHRA have used exactly the same terminology as the EU for the SMEs, the small to medium-sized enterprises, where they're saying they need to be permanently and continuously at their disposal. So it doesn't have to be a full-time role. It can be an organization or someone part-time that's doing that role.
Just on that point, I got a notified body that that had some kind of issues about this wording of permanently and continuously available, because oh, you should be even available at 2 in the morning. They can call you when you are sleeping and this and that. So, guys, let's be serious here. So are we really going on that direction? So there are still some misinterpretation by some notified bodies that are starting to think, oh yeah, you should be like at their disposal at the minute and ask them, I mean, answer all their questions while you are sleeping. So we have also to be cautious on what we are telling to the manufacturers or to the notified body, because it's I mean, unless you have another thinking of that.
Well, I would take continuous as the same term as continuous improvement. You're not continuously improving your quality management system at 2 o'clock in the morning, but you do have very clear timelines written in. Based on this role, based on the responsibilities of this role, you do need people to have quick responses, and that depends on the legislation. So if your response time for certain inputs is 2 days, that person needs to be there and have 2 days coverage. So if you're planning that particular role within your quality management system, you've got to think, what happens when they're on vacation?
Exactly.
What happens? We always used to say in Switzerland, what happens if someone breaks their leg skiing? Because they could be out for 6 weeks or more. And that was how we designed it. Since moving to the UK, I hear, what happens if everybody wins the lottery?
Yeah.
And they just leave, which is much more positive. So I'm going to take that from now on.
Yeah, no, it's great. Another question about the EU and UK. So we are working a lot with the EU MDR to build the technical files for EU MDR. So it's a lot of work, a lot of things. So the question that I get a lot of time is, can I use this technical file that I have for EU MDR and to submit to the UK for the UKCA? So is there any restriction for that, or should I completely change the structure, or is it possible to use exactly the same version, or what's your thinking on that?
Well, I think UK-approved bodies have to be very pragmatic, and given that the UK market's about 3% compared to the EU market, which is 20% of the global medical device market, I think to expect manufacturers to rewrite their technical documentation for the UK, particularly when the UK is changing, it's in very uncertain times, would be very selfish and narrow-minded. Most of the UCABs that I have been in contact with, so that's both those that are designated, those that are in the pipeline, are all taking the same approach where they would have the EU MDR technical documentation covering what we would call the common criteria to both EU and UK. And then you have an addendum just for the UK, which covers the national differences. Bearing in mind, within the EU, it's 27 member states that have to agree to a change, and they've been very prescriptive in their requirements for technical documentation. Whereas the UK, we're working with a single competent authority that's much more pragmatic. I would say, obviously, you base your body of your technical documentation on the EU requirements, and then submit the addendum, which covers those basically how at the moment we've got essential requirements in the UK rather than the GSPRs. Oh. How do they align up? Now, even if we were to move to the GSPRs and we were to have those same requirements, does your technical documentation for the EU cover the UK requirement in each case, and sort of work through almost like a gap analysis? The same applies to designated standards. The UK isn't using that. They're using designated standards, but those designated standards might include the harmonized standards, sort of aligned up those standards in the same way that you would do if you were preparing technical documentation for the US and the EU. I think one of the things that's quite important is considering the medical practice in the UK. So it is a bit different. We do have a National Health Service. The environment by which treatments are given might be different from the EU member state where you've got your designation, your notified body designation, and the best practices implemented through your conformity assessment process. So you could see different users interacting with those devices, different use environments, and also different clinical best practices. So how does your device fit into that? Now, again, today, we're accepting devices with CE marking in the market of Great Britain. But as that evolves, you might want to put in extra content to explain how you're meeting those requirements. And I think also be mindful with some of the other requirements. So obviously, if you've got an MRI machine, you're doing machinery directive as well. Some of the other directives are changing. I've also noticed there's obviously references to waste management because we're looking at the whole medical device life cycle in the new legislations. And the UK waste management might be different to the EU member state where your notified body is designated. So there could be differences that need to be packed into that addendum. And then when the UK approved body receives that pack, if you've already been through conformity assessment based on that technical documentation, you should be able to leverage that conformity assessment process. So the reports and the feedback from the notified body showing that you're meeting the common requirements to the UK. And then the UK approved body should be able to take that and then really focus on the national differences which are packed into that addendum.
Hey, just a second. Do you need a EU, Swiss or UK representative? Then choose Easy Medical Device. We can represent you and also become your importer. Contact us at eo@easymedicaldevice.com. Okay. Now I think it makes completely sense, and I'm really happy that there is kind of a discussion there that is happening, and not like saying no, you should completely change everything and to put everything to the UKCA, and we don't want to hear about, because when you look at the at the UK MDR 2002, it says that the EU MDR 2017-745 is rejected or not included, etc. So it's more about this kind of wording that people can interpret to say that no, we are like UK don't want to hear anything about EU MDR and you have to follow EU MDD, etc. But it makes sense now. So thank you for that. Other question about labels that I get a lot. Should I have a specific label for the UK with the UKCA, and when I will be UKCA certified, if I can say, or can I also have a same label for UK and Europe with the CE mark for Europe and for the UKCA for UK, but then there will be a EU representative for Europe and maybe a UKRP for UK, etc., and different notified bodies maybe for both. So how can we manage all that there?
There's a lot of information to go onto labels, and obviously there's Switzerland as well now with the Swiss representative as well. Yeah. So there's quite a lot of content there. Most notified bodies that I've talked to would accept your labeling, but do check with your notified body. Remember, if you update your label, you've got to get that approval from the notified body and the UK approved body now. So this is why I'm saying if you're going to go for UKCA marking, the ideal transition is when you're going through the EU MDR transition, because then you can do all the labeling approvals at the same time. If you can't do that, leave space in your artwork so that you can actually fit that information on. I think the real take-home message is make sure it's very, very clear what content relates to the UK approval, what content relates to the EU approval, what content relates to the Swiss as well, because obviously one of the criteria of labeling is it is unambiguous. And so if you've got names and addresses, it's got to be very clear which match to which requirements so that it can be found by the user.
So do you think there will be because in Europe we have the symbol for EU rep or EC rep. In Switzerland we have the CH rep. I don't see still the symbol for UK. Do you think they will place that somewhere so that we have also UK rep or UK RP there? Because mainly it will help also to say this is specifically for the UK, this is for Switzerland, this is for EU, etc., etc.
Yeah, exactly. I think that will come.
I hope. I hope they will be making something like that, because for now everybody's writing UK responsible person, and then the if I can say the names, is just to see if there is an harmonization on the symbols there.
I have seen the label, though. I have seen that symbol for the UKRP on packaging, so maybe I'll check that up afterwards and see if I can send you a link to add on to the podcast.
Great.
For that information.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of question is, which symbol should I use? Is it official? Is it harmonized? Is it like coming from the UK mature, etc.? We have also, and we discussed about that also, about notified bodies and approved bodies. So if I remember, we have now 4 or 5 approved bodies in the UK. They are not covering all the same type of products. So we have that. So would you have, maybe difficult question, but would you have a preference to recommend some notified or approved bodies in the UK? Because you don't have a lot of choices, so at the end it's like, which one should I choose exactly that can help me there?
So I think there are 2 questions here. So firstly, why would you be choosing a UK approved body at the moment? So it might be that you've got an innovative technology and you want to take advantage of some of the fast track, or really the UK seems to be really incentivized to get new technology onto the market. So that could be one reason why you're liaising directly with the UK approved body. The other reason is obviously you're going through that EU MDR transition and you want to make the best of that labeling point. You're absolutely right. There are only 4 approved at the moment, and those 4 do have quite different scopes. I think there's only one with a full scope. The others have got quite limited scopes. Would you switch at this point? Personally, I wouldn't. I think that there's been a huge amount of interest in UK approved bodies. The designation process is slow. You have to interact with both UKAS, which is the national accreditation body, and MHRA, which is the competent authority, and align all those bits together. The requirements are quite specific, particularly around impartiality and independence, and that is quite challenging to show when you've also, for practical reasons, got to have this fluid transfer of information and also resource between a notified body and a UK approved body to make sure the customers are getting the best service. So it is quite an art rather than a science to get designation, but obviously it's possible. We've been there, we've done it. And I suspect that within the next 3 to 6 months, we'll start seeing a lot more organizations come through that process. So I wouldn't rush to change now unless it's imperative that you get your innovative technology on the UK market, because you can do it under CE. Regarding who do you choose? Sorry, do you want to ask a question?
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, who you choose depends on your organisation, because I think all bodies have got a different flavour, if I may say that. Some are very customer focused, some are very in-depth, others are much more superficial, but have got digitalised systems, and I'm sure people can guess who I'm talking about with all of those. So it really depends on what you want for a customer. I mean, one of the things I would say is the relationship you have with your UK responsible person, just like your EU rep, the relationship you have with your UK approved body, just like your notified body, are critical for your business. So you should go through a supplier validation process. Because you can only have one, you can't have multiple for the same product. You have to be absolutely thorough in that process and choose what's right for your business and choose what's going to, we've talked about the scopes. If you've got a portfolio of products, you want that one organization to be able to do the certification of all the products that you're going to submit to them. There's no point in going to a notified body that's only got half your products, because you're going to have to go to another one for the other half. So yeah, what's their scope?
It's mainly the question also about I have, as you've said, I have already a notified body in Europe. Now I need to go to the UK. For example, we have some manufacturers that say, okay, I need to go to Europe and also UK. Which notified bodies would you recommend today? And I mean, there are not a lot of options of notified bodies that are in Europe and UK at the same moment. So it's like you have just two, if I remember, that maybe can be on the scope. So now the question is, as you said, should we focus first on Europe and wait with a notified body that maybe we prefer, and wait for them to be then accredited for UK? Should we rush already to the big notified bodies that are in Europe and UK already? There was also this question about the bridging procedure, because if you take this notified body that is also in UK and in Europe, they can also leverage what they have made in Europe for UK. So these were a lot of there is a lot of strategy here that people are trying to guess. Also, in terms of pricing, the cost of a notified body starts to be a bit high. So with all those ingredients and formulas, so how would you make, I mean, what would be your guidance for them to choose or to go on the right direction?
Right, so if we start with cost, I think cost is really misleading, because even though we're now publishing fees, the charging structure is very different, and some notified bodies are more expensive than others, irrespective of their hourly cost. It's just their efficiency, the way that they approach conformity assessment. The biggest reduction in cost that any manufacturer can do is submitting good technical documentation, because that goes through much faster and it can reduce your costs considerably. So regarding who do you choose, this is a long-term partnership. You want a stable organization. You want an organization that's core business includes medical. So there's a lot of organizations where it's almost like medical's an add-on. Also note that, I'm scarred because I've been through, I was in manufacturing when our notified body was de-designated. That was Swiss TS. And I've also been in a notified body that's withdrawn. And I've seen the impact on manufacturers. So I would really, really emphasize stability. And a lot of notified bodies do actually have two notified bodies within Europe. So TÜV Süd's opening up a new site in Denmark. Kiwa obviously bought DER, so there's two organizations there. DEKRA has two named notified bodies. DMV bought MedCert. You see, there's a lot where they're stabilizing through having multiple sites. That, to me, if I were a manufacturer, would be quite attractive. I think DQS is part of UL, or they're linked somehow. So going to an organization where there's some sort of relationship with another notified body. So if one gets problems, and it might not be de-designation, it might just be that they don't have resource to cover the technology that you have. If they've got a relationship with another organization that they can leverage, it means that you are going to be in a more stable, safe position. So regarding considering the UK, I think the UK is still in very early days. I wouldn't jump notified body because they don't have a UK approved body. There are many other reasons why I would jump notified body, particularly around the service, but I wouldn't jump because of the UK approved body, because I think that will come with time. Exactly. But I would talk to the notified body because if you're with a notified body, particularly some of the smaller ones, where it's not going to be economically viable to have a UK approved body, actually now is the time to change notified bodies because of the extension that was brought in under the EU MDR. That transitional extension makes changing notified bodies much easier and lower cost than if you wait.
Yeah, so it's really important what you are mentioning here about also the UK that is not stable completely because there are still some changes. I'm also trying to advise some of the customers to say, wait until really the last moment to change, or don't do it immediately now if it's not needed, if there is no real interest. If it's just for you to move for moving, it's maybe not the good time, because there are a lot of change that will happen in the UK. So do it like that. But for the choosing the notified or the approved body there is no kind, I mean, there is also the question from people say, who is the best, which one you recommend, etc. So, and there is no trip advisor things with the stars and saying what are your comments on the notified bodies, etc. But this is something that they are really looking at, as you said, also which one is stable, which one is reliable, which one is efficient, etc. There is no kind of monitoring service or system where we can get a feedback also from customers to say, yes, we had a great relationship with them, everything went well, or no, this one was really poor, notified body didn't, the auditor didn't show up to our audit, etc. I mean, there is nothing like that. So it's really, I understand the customer saying, I have so many choices now that what should I do? Which one should I go for? And as you say, it's like a marriage. So it's like we have to be in a relationship for a long time, but I don't know you, you don't know me. So how can we tie together? And this is the thing that a lot of manufacturers are really struggling with. So,
and I would say that if you were to have reviews, what one manufacturer values is not the same as another manufacturer. And I've often heard complaints, complaints extremes, and one side a manufacturer say, I went to this notified body, they raised 200 questions, I didn't change my technical documentation, I submitted it with this one and I got no questions and it went straight through. And me, having sort of obviously been in risk mitigation for manufacturers, would go, oh, I would probably go back and look at those questions that were raised by the first notified body, because it doesn't seem to me that the other one is maybe doing due diligence, because notified bodies don't raise questions for the good of their health. They don't raise it to get money, because actually they've got enough work, they've got enough revenue. So then I hear the other extreme, where a manufacturer's got a certificate, they're a CEO of a company, they thought that their regulatory team had done a fantastic job, and then perhaps their file gets pulled by the competent authority for review, or their regulatory team leaves and they get somebody else come in who says, whoa, look at all these risks. So the notified body's role is to assess the technical documentation, assess the QMS and the manufacturing environment against the minimum requirements. What do you want as a manufacturer to get back from that assessment? Is it just a certificate? If it's just a certificate, I would question why you're a medical device in the first place, because actually what you should be looking is to really challenge your systems, to have a relationship with your notified body where you as a manufacturer are growing in knowledge and competency through those reviews and through those interactions. So I think that one of the big challenges that's been over the last 4 or 5 years is the flux of resource moving out of notified bodies, and because of the pressures that were there, but also moving between notified bodies as well, and in manufacturing. So what you're seeing, we've had situations where we've sent auditors into a manufacturer, and the auditors are more experienced with the manufacturer's processes than the regulatory people, because I've had so much turnover in the regulatory team over the last few years. So I think you want to choose wisely, try and get that relationship with the notified body, try and work with them, not against them. Prepare your technical documentation so that information can be found, and almost treat it like you would any other exam. If you're sitting your baccalaureate or you're sitting an exam in the UK, you present your knowledge to the examiner in a way that they can find the answers quickly. And if you don't, you fail the exam.
Yeah.
This is no different.
Yeah. I think it's clear, and we are all humans. So what's happening with one can be different with another. So, and the different companies' situation, cases, etc., makes it also difficult to have one answer to any the same answer to any cases there. In terms of the UK, we also hearing a lot now that, I mean, the objective of UK is mainly to have their own regulation, own requirements, and they are doing really great on trying to make this transition. We hear also that MDSAP, for the MDSAP, they will maybe be part of MDSAP, or they will be maybe accepting or being one of the country that will be included inside the MDSAP. So is there some, what is the situation for that for the UK now?
So the UK is already part of the MDSAP as an affiliated member. So that's exactly the same as the EU. They were there from the beginning. MHRA has been more involved in MDSAP, and certainly at the MDSAP meetings, they've actually been taking part as a regulator, which I think is really exciting. It was also part of the consultation process in 2021 that MHRA would recognise MDSAP certificates and audit reports, which again, I think is really important. I personally think MDSAP is really important for the UK as a regulatory jurisdiction because it gives MHRA access to the other jurisdictions already within MDSAP. They can exchange regulatory intelligence, and I think that's been really valuable for the members of the regulatory authorities already in MDSAP. I think that would really benefit the UK. I sort of stop at making MDSAP mandatory as they have done in Canada, because I think that it is expensive. For a small manufacturer, it's probably too heavy. So I think that to have it as a recognised route and part of their international recognition programme, I think is great. I wouldn't make it mandatory, but already that is going down the line. I've heard talk about including MHRA requirements already in the MDSAP report in the other regulatory jurisdictions part, so that an auditor could prepare just an MDSAP report and use that for UKCA, which is something, again, I really support, because I hate the idea of duplicating and making reports for report's sake. So I think there's certainly some positive movement there.
So you heard what happened also in the Switzerland when we had this EU situation with no extension at the beginning. Now there is extension, where Swiss said, okay, we don't know really what Europe is doing. Let's also, as a second option, have also the authorization for US products to be authorized to be then registered in the UK, in Switzerland. So do you think UK will go also in that direction to say, okay, if you are 510K or US approved, then you can also come to the UK?
Yes, but I think it's very complicated.
Okay.
So obviously a 510K is based on equivalence, and the amount of data that you need for a 510K is very small compared to the EU MDR. And the EU MDR was really implemented to make sure that a medical device was underpinned with data. One of the problems under the directive is this manufacturer said we're relying on this data, and this one said we're relying on that data, and there was no data. And so there was this big hole created through having this equivalence without the raw data being examined for each medical device. So I think 510K is just a little bit, but that's the majority of the US approvals. So the PMA, I can see a very clear, going back to what we were saying about the abridged process for the UK, where you have common specifications and national differences, and you see the common specifications in CE or a US PMA, or even an approval from Japan, and you've outlined that those are already done, and you look at the way that the conformity assessment process was performed, so you do your due diligence, but you really focus on the national differences. I think that would work for all major jurisdictions, all trusted jurisdictions. When it comes to the 510K, there's quite a big gap, and this is where I think the challenges are already in Switzerland and will then come in the UK. Unless you've got a mechanism to access that data, it's going to be difficult. But that's my personal opinion, and I don't know how the UK will see that. Certainly when we were brainstorming in DEKRA, we were saying, what process can we build that currently abridges a CE, but actually sort of acts as a funnel, and any jurisdiction can come in, because we saw that as the vision in the UK. So we opened that from the beginning.
No, I think it's great, and it's good that UK is also looking for options for their patients, their manufacturers, their people, so that they can have access to more technologies or more products, and it's not just a regulatory point that is blocking, but having also this option is helpful. But yeah, making it safe, making it performant, making it not just rushing on the solution that is mainly that everybody is looking for is also good from their side. Great. So I think we covered all the topics, I hope, about UK. So
Monia, maybe just one comment on innovative device pathways, because the UK is really investing a lot in creating pathways where they can leverage this body of information, which is the NHS, and use that information to really streamline clinical trials. And some of the things that have been discussed is having much closer partnerships with MHRA as the competent authority, the UK approved body, and the manufacturer where there is innovative devices. So it's going to take some time. It's not going to happen overnight, but I think, again, medical device manufacturers plan their regulatory strategy quite far ahead. Do keep looking at the UK market as a platform to launch innovative devices, because they are very open-minded to that, and it might overcome some of the hurdles we see regarding the depth of data that you need to launch a product in Europe, in the EU, or in the US, because with one competent authority and that partnership with the UK approved body and the manufacturer, there might be mechanisms by which that could work for manufacturers.
And it will be great to have that in the UK, because for now we have made some criticism to Europe because of those innovative products that there is no fast track pathway, if I can say, for that. So it's mainly the thing that we are really looking for also in Europe. So I hope UK will be succeeding also for this item here. Great. So I said we are, I think, covered everything. So where people can follow up with you if they have some question, because I suppose maybe there will be still some question that we haven't covered. So where they can maybe catch up with you, as long as you are not part of a notified body, so that they can maybe ask you a few questions.
Well, I would say post questions, even if I were in the notified body. You can contact me via LinkedIn. Do reach out, because it's only when we're getting that feedback in and we're knowing what the manufacturers need, we can respond. And so even, no matter what my role is, if I've got that information, we can produce FAQs, we can go again for podcasts and find other ways to get the information out to the manufacturers. What I really hate is the fact that manufacturers don't know where to turn for information, and perhaps they're reluctant to pose certain questions to their notified bodies in case it's a sign of weakness.
Exactly.
So if we can have a much more open dialogue between everybody, I think that's the way we're going to move this industry forwards.
No, it's great. And don't hesitate also to send questions to me, and anonymously, if I can say, I will contact people, and maybe even Claire also, to come back to try to answer those questions. So there will be then no consulting, no one-to-one, so it will be great, and we can answer the question to a lot of people. So Claire, I will put your contact details on the show notes. So please, for everybody, you can go to the show notes. I will put also the links on the show notes about the UK legislation, about all those timelines that we talked about, the dates, etc., so that you can see that. But yeah, I'm sure there will be some changes in the future. So if there are really some big changes, I will re-invite you, Claire, so that you can really help us to really understand more about this again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire. So then, don't hesitate, as I've said, for people that are listening, to go again on the comments of the YouTube channel, or also on LinkedIn, and just to place your questions. I'll try to gather that and or answer if we have the answer, or try to gather that and make another episode with Claire. For any other points also, if you want to see other topics on this podcast, so don't hesitate also to send me your question, and then I will try to find the right guest also to answer to that. Okay, Claire, so it was really a pleasure. Thank you very much for your help, and I wish you a nice day.
Thank you. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.